This episode was really difficult to make. Actually, it's proving to be more difficult to post. You see, I tried something and it did not work out. I made a mistake, a little bit of a miscalculation, but now that I'm going to post this video, I'm going to own it really publicly. So, maybe it's best to just start at the beginning.
We spent decades chasing the American dream, only to realize that working more to have more wasn't exactly the dream we expected to be living. Together, we walked away from it all to rediscover what's really necessary to live a rewarding life. Inspired by other YouTubers, we bought a fixer-upper sailboat in the hopes of discovering the world anew. Just as soon as we learned to sail. Well, I'm preparing to take on our biggest eyesore, which is the Bimini. Let me show you the shape it's in. Here's an overview of the current state of the Bimini. You can see that we've got some holes. We had some prior patches here that have worn through. Another hole that lets water in. This is a great big one. Gives us some sunlight. But these Bimini tops last a number of years. This one's a few years probably past its prime. It's also rather loose. Hopefully you can kind of see that. So we've got some adjustments to make. Okay, I kind of feel like I need to start with the disclaimer, and that is to say that there are probably hundreds of ways to do a Bimini top. This is just the way that I have chosen to do the Bimini top. I've spent a lot of time kind of out here in the cockpit redoing woodwork and reorganizing things in lazarettes and other things, and I've come up with what I think is a good plan A. I've kind of got a plan B. We're going to see what we encounter along the way, but the primary consideration I had was what to go back with. So I did consider sewing this. While I trust my sewing, it's my pattern making and other things. First one, I don't know. So I started thinking about hard tops for a number of reasons. The biggest was that I would like to at some point add solar to the boat, and the Hardtop Bimini would give me a location to do that. With the Bimini top removed, we can turn our attention to the frame. So I want to use as much of the existing frame as I possibly can, but I've got kind of two constraints to take in mind. The first is I don't want to be banging my head. So as I walk through the cockpit, I want to make sure these remain above my head. Let me get you under one as well. Okay, the second constraint is this space here, which falls between the mizzen mast and going off to the deck. So I want to make certain that I have enough room here to comfortably be able to not only access the mizzen, but also be able to climb the mizzen. Okay, I really could start anywhere here, but I've started close to the Dodger because of this space. What I want to do is beef up the structure a little bit. So the first thing I did is I found a couple of pieces of stainless at the consignment shop. It was actually part of a Bimini, and I have cut those to length and added some hardware to it to be able to separate the Dodger from the remaining Bimini. This whole space will not be covered with a top, but I want to make certain that we add some rigidity. So this adds, if you will, like feet forward, allowing us to take advantage of the Dodger mounting as well as the aft Bimini mounting in order to make a solid surface. The back bar has set the height. This center bar actually is not tensioned currently. I'm holding it with the straps just as an extra piece of support. But I did tie the corners together with some additional bars here. So this is actually much stouter. The force that's going to be put on this is going to be basically from the top. Okay, so I put double-sided tape down, just basting tape from the sewing kit and some Durascrim material to try to determine what the pattern is going to be like. I'm going to have to come up with a design to get around rigging and also to extend past this area but still leave room enough to get up the mizzen. So I've laid out a piece of nidacore. I'm using 1/2" nidacore because it was really readily available in my area to make the rigidity or kind of the center, if you will, of the sandwich. So the plan would be
to fiberglass both top and bottom, but the first thing we got to do is get this into shape. So the nidacore panels that I bought, these are 4 by 7 foot, and they are pre-scored, and so they will bend pretty much in any direction that we need them to in order to conform to shape. So the first thing I want to do is this morning is get the pattern out that we made last night and make some marks here on the rigid panel, and we'll go ahead and cut that and dry fit it to shape. A little more coffee, we'll get going. Okay, so with the pattern transferred, I'm just going to use a utility knife. So we'll just make a first pass, get it in the right shape. Well, I can already tell this is going to be nice. Alright, so first consideration, overlap on the sides. But here's my concern, is that still, I think that is too close for me. So I've also marked the top here where I think we'd have enough clearance. I'll make a couple of notes on that back bow, and then we'll move back to the table. Alright, so just kind of cut out, widen that hole a little bit. We can clean it up a little later. We'll end up fairing the corners anyway with a little bit of an edge. So I'm marking a line kind of 4 inches off of where that bow was, the front bow. I was really thinking it was going to be 3 inches, but I'll tell you my thinking here is a little margin of error, but also I'd like to add a little bit of space to the back. Alright, so dry fit again. Much happier with this. Now you can see the arc overhang from that front bow. Oh, there are parrotfish on the ladder. Hold on, let's see if we can get them. See if you can hear this. There's also a little crab on the dock. Those are parrotfish eating off the ladder. Alright, well, as cool as that is, as distracting as that is, you can also notice here what we've done on the side. So now we have a little bit more of an overhang here on the back, which I'm a lot happier with. So back to the bench. This is a little bit of an experiment, but we've got our second panel out here, and I have turned over the one we just had. I'm going to trace this cutout on the other side. I'm not presumptuous enough to think that one half of the boat is a mirror image of the other half of the boat, but my curiosity has the best of me. Here's the coolest thing. Let me move some things out of the way. Can you believe it? Look at that, right in the center of that pattern. Just want you to know how shocked I am. There's like no symmetry on a boat. I'm going to score a line down the center so I kind of know where this is. We'll test fit that again as well. And I'm going to mark kind of even things at either end.
Are you Facebooking it or?
YouTube.
Oh, YouTube.
Is that worse?
No, because people don't know me on YouTube.
Oh, okay. All right, Gordon has joined in with a table saw. We're going to get a form built out of this piece of really thin plywood.
Flow to the stern here.
So here's the form that we just cut, plus a couple of shims underneath to get the form. And I'm going to show it to you from outside. Ooh, ah. Welcome to day 2 of the Bimini fiberglass project. I'm going to show you where we ended last night. So all of this has hardened up, and we've trimmed a little bit off the side just in order to make the second panel fit. Next for us is cutting this panel in order to match them together, and then we'll mate them with the fiberglass. Okay, so we dry fit the second panel after cutting, and this is what I was after. I want to make sure this seam is relatively even. I think the center seam is a little forgiving, but you can see we have the same cutout here for our rigging, and we want to make certain that our overhang remains similar between the two as well. So, man, all things looking good. Well, we're in the middle of forming, and we can't quite get this board to come down where we want it to be. I've tried to tape it. That didn't work out so well. We can't really put a weight on top. You can see how it all matches up. So here you go, plan B, ratchet strap. Tied it down nice. Putting the first layer of chop down, we're just going to cut it kind of right over here just to make certain we get around the stay and to make sure we got the right length, although you can kind of see by now we got a pretty good overlap. So just to double check before we start mixing resin and getting things going. And with the nidacore in place, we then will begin the process of fiberglassing. This is a chemical reaction, so it is a two-part epoxy, if you will. It's actually polyester, but we have a resin which makes up the overwhelming majority of our mixture. 1% to 1.5% because of our temperatures here in Florida of a hardener that get added to that, create a chemical reaction. Resin of death. All right, 5 cc's. This gives a little bit of a working time as we're mixing that in. Now we mix before it will begin to set and become firm. And we mix. And we mix. And when we think we're done mixing, we mix. And, you know, there's a bit of a process once you kind of get going. Not a lot of pausing or just, you know, hanging out, wasting time with the resin. So you want to be able to have some good working time here on the panels. So adhering it is really, in our case, is really, I was going to say a 3-step process. Let me explain it this way. This cottony surface sits on top. We just did some dry fit. So what we took is a chop strand. This I think it's 1.75 chop strand, which is a bunch of fiberglass hairs that kind of are going in every which direction. This then gets applied to the panel. We kind of kept it in place just dry, and then we would cover this with that epoxy resin and hardener. That chemical reaction then sets. This of course has to be smoothed and worked the entire time. We want this good and saturated so that we make a solid bond. This will continue down the panel, and while this is still tacky, really kind of green hardens in maybe 30 minutes is maybe what we're working on. 20 to 30 minutes is about all that we're really going to get off of this. When we're really in the sunlight, that probably gets reduced down to 12 maybe. In any case, from there we then add a second layer, and this is a biaxial. So this cloth is woven on one side, and then the other side has that same chop strand type material on the bottom. So if you can picture this being saturated, then this layer comes on top of that, adds even more rigidity, which we're then adding another pot of resin on top of. Anyway, you get the idea. This whole process gets repeated all the way throughout the panel with a lot of smoothing and rolling. We want to prevent any air bubbles from building up underneath or creating any voids in our fiberglass that would require us to fill them later. We're going to have them. We're certainly going to have them with this type of material. They're not going to be, 100% preventable, but I want to minimize them as much as possible in order to prevent more work with the grinder and sander, which you'll see here shortly. Well, everything's had a chance to set now. So we'd mix a pot, put down a layer of chop strand, mix some more pot, continue to saturate. That would be the vocabulary word of the day, I think, is saturate your fiberglass. But we got the whole thing covered. Okay, so now what I'm going to do is remove the forms that we had underneath holding it in place, and I'll mark the edges of what needs to be trimmed or what might have come out of alignment, just so we keep everything, each step of the way we kind of keep everything symmetrical. So the big step is going to be getting it off the boat and moving it to the work area where we will put it upside down and repeat the same job. All right, so we've got it moved over, and we're actually using the trailer as our kind of reverse form. This is pretty solid. It just needed a little bit of bracing here and there as we get ready to run 50 inches down the center here, and we'll kind of take it from there. Kind of see where we stand currently, having flipped it over and done one 50-inch roll of the chop strand with one 50-inch roll of the that biaxial on top of that with resin. And you can probably see a handful of bubbles in here. We've done our best to roll them out, but we still have a few voids. Anyway, we'll have to clean this up. So the next step is going to be grinding off this excess material that we have on the outside, so we begin to put the gutter on the outside. So sanding, grinding, cutting fiberglass, that means suiting up. Oh, I forgot my respirator.
Yeah, where is it?
Suck in my boat. Gotta turn on the breaker. Okay, all trimmed up now. You can see it's starting to resemble a bimini, albeit with a little bit of leaf on top. Well, we're doing a little design work this morning over coffee. I'm going to do a little bit of a mock-up of what I hope is going to be our drain system. So you can see my pattern. I've actually kind of just traced this one out here on the board, and I'm going to put a 1/2 inch through hole through this spot. We've also cut some lengthier strips here to use as guttering. I'm going to grab some duct tape and mock this up. Alright, well, I'm working on the gutter. I'll show you kind of what I have in mind. So I want to be able to catch the rain as it comes off. Keep in mind this is upside down. Alright, it may help to take a look from the bottom side so you can get an idea of, well, the bottom at least here of my rack. This is actually the top. But the idea is water running off will meet kind of a gutter and keep it from just splashing down the side of the boat. Here's what I'm doing as just kind of a test. I started with some duct tape and just a couple of pieces and different sides, then put a couple of layers of chop strand, and I just fiberglassed it. Got a few gaps in there kind of by design because I'm gonna have to kind of make this corner. I'm not exactly certain how I'm gonna do that yet, so we'll figure that out. Okay, it's the second half of day 6, and we have the gutter now kind of done all the way around. Right now we're gonna weather it in by fiberglassing in this last white strips. I have cut some biaxial as well as some chop strand to fit in the gap that we had left on both sides. And now we will mix up some resin and get to fiberglassing. Alright, so that's the first pass. Got everything kind of weathered in now, at least structurally. Tomorrow we'll concentrate on starting to make it look pretty. Well, it's pretty close to day 7, I think. That's a week of dealing with the Bimini top, making it structural. And I think I hinted yesterday that it was time to make it pretty. So we're going to take a few steps toward that today. This means suiting up for a little bit. But here's going to be the plan. We're going to sand this down as well as trim off some of the excess. You can see, you know, I've got some areas here. I've got a couple of voids here and there. The idea here is we're going to try to make this as smooth as we possibly can, within reason. We're going to make it roughly smooth, but it's the shape that I'm after today. So let's see if we can't get this Bimini into the Bimini shape, and then we'll move on to a little bit of some gel coat putty and smooth things out. So now that grinding off all those loose edges and sanding everything smooth is finished, we opened up a couple of voids in this where the fiberglass just had not fully affixed itself to the nidacore. And so we're sanding out any air pockets or any voids, if you will, underneath. They're fairly visible. You can kind of see after sanding even, ignore that leaf, but you can see the white spots that look like, that's where it was risen. They look like they're will have risen, but that's actually smooth right now, having taken that off. So there were a couple of areas that were just a little higher than others, and there were a couple that were voids where, this is one example, where the fiberglass never stuck to the nidacore. So that has been sanded off, and I re-glassed that in. So now that we have all of that fixed, we'll do a little sanding just to kind of further make sure any of those rough edges of the new pieces are smooth, but we're going to go ahead and move on with a little bit of a gel coat putty, see if we can't use that as kind of a fairing filler, if you will. The idea here is we're going to give it a skim coat, make things really, really smooth, get rid of this pattern. It's also white, so it's going to change the color a little bit. All right, so we're using white gel coat putty here. So, oh wow. Wow, this stuff is really thick. Alright, so that stuff is pretty thick. We're going to mix that with organic peroxide, which is like the two-part hardener here. So let's glove up so that we're safe. Alright, now we're going to have to be ready to work as soon as this stuff starts mixing. So 1, 2, 8, 9, 10. Yep, that's it. And we're going to use a spatula once we get this mixed up. You can see it thickening up. I'm just going to put some of this out and really work it in. Oh man, it's really hurting my hand. I don't have a way to change hands. It's not like working with a sander. Definitely sucks to get older. Okay, just kept putting on layers. This first one we put on too thick, as you can see, and look, we ran out. Probably not going to make it that far anyway, and we do have another side, so we'll grab another couple of pounds of that tomorrow, but it's starting to shape up. Back in the jumpsuit. Got some crazy hair going on today too. Now that our filler has been able to set, it's ready to sand. So this is already pretty smooth. No more sharp edges. We filled in any little gaps and holes. So that's its primary purpose. Secondary, you know, it's somewhat of a primer, if you will, for the gel coat that'll go on later. So today we're going to sand this smooth to keep it looking pretty. We've got some areas to still fill in. And then we're going to work on where the backstays come through today. Maybe do a little bit of repair. You know, fill a couple of these gaps. We've got a couple of small holes, a couple of little burn throughs and repairs to do on the gutter. So a little maintenance today and then we'll be ready to flip her over. Alright, well that went a long way to getting it smooth. I'm going to start working on this corner. I'm going to use this Dremel and see if we can't just sand out. I may have to cut out a few pieces there for the backstay, but I'm going to try to clean this up. So think of this as the before. Now that we've kind of got a rough in shape, we're going to do some finish work. Well, once we do the other one. I've cut some small pieces of chop strand that then we'll come over and kind of overlap it. So the idea here is kind of twofold. One is we need the strength that the chop and the fiberglass is going to give us, but we also need a nice clean line. I rounded the corners a little bit, did the same on this side, and then just kind of clean this up so that everything was rounded and covered. Maybe that's a master technique. Pro tip, slapdash. All right, back at it today. I know this comes as a shock, but fairing, fiberglass, sanding. Fairing, sanding, fiberglass, sanding, fairing, fiberglass. Well, before we flip it over, we're going to want to put a light fixture in here, a red light that'll end up being just above the helm. Eventually I'm going to run conduit on the top side, so this will be a good marker once we flip it over to see kind of where everything's going to go. Okay, so I've made a lap now on the inside of the guttering all the way around. We're going to do a little bit of filleting in here, and here's the deal is fiberglass doesn't make a 90-degree turn. So what we're going to do is fill in this gap, if you will, so that we can make a natural break with the fiberglass over the edge. And when that's done, we'll come along and trim these edges so that the gutter's nice and clean. So I'm using this Evercoat Formula 27, and I've never done this before. So, you know, I've read the directions a few times. Fairly straightforward, I guess. We're just going to mix it up a lot like epoxy and, you know, use it as filler for filleting. This is kind of like toothpaste, I guess, would be a good description for it. This is the hardener. Add a ribbon of hardener from edge to edge across the center. Okay, you be the judge. That looks about right. From the mixing area. Alright, we got some shade tree engineering going on today. So what we need are some beveled edges. Fiberglass can't make a 90-degree turn. So, hot glued some straws on to help us with this bend. We've also put the conduit in place. We're just holding it with some hot glue. Made a junction box so that our wires coming into can then bend and go up to the light up front. We need this to be tall enough actually to mount a stern light right here on the back, and then we're going to fiberglass over, of course, all of this. Our solar panels came in today, so we made little feet in order to make those level. Those boards there are kind of propping them up, but this is kind of a rough draft, if you will. This will be the framing underneath. The reason we're going with wood is I want to be able to screw into it. Can't screw into that hollow core panel. And then you can kind of see it from this side as well. I just have that as a placeholder. That'll be the red light that's down at the helm. We'll just box that in as well. So anyway, slowly but surely. Monitoring our progress this morning. Our 5200 is definitely hardening up, but not everything is set yet, so I don't want to fare near it. What I'm going to do instead is see if we can't get the curve put in over the straws with a little bit of fiberglass where we smooth things out. I'll show you what this looks like. You can see the straw still buried inside of there, but we got a good rounded kind of shape, which we can sand down to make a little more perfect. But still, man, that's really great. So doesn't even move. All right, we're taking a break in the fiberglassing to change these supports. I've actually already undone it a little bit. I've conked my head like 3 or 4 times. It's just, that's not going to work for me. So I'm rethinking this, and here's what we're going to do. So I've already started to remount this one. I'm going to use the same hardware that we had, but what we'll do is mount this up onto the deck. Now I've already drilled the first hole just as a marker, but essentially it's going to require drilling through the deck, climbing in the lazarette in order to attach the hardware, sealing it with a little 4200 or maybe some butyl tape. We'll just take a look at that in a minute here and get it all tightened up. But with any luck, that gets things off my head, and we'll continue to support the Bimini frame before we bring the hardtop in for a dry fit. So a couple little small adjustments. Here we go. All right, let me see if I can show you. But this is how we're coming through here on the bottom. Right there. And here's the finished product. This is a lot more stable. You can see it on this side as well. And more importantly, look, nothing to bang our head on. All right, well, we've got just about everything glassed in now. Solar panel feet. Light over the helm. Conduit going back to a junction box.
Things are looking a little furry at the moment, but that's because we got to do some sanding. So we'll get to this last round of sanding. It's not really a last round. That was optimistic. That tells you what I'm thinking. This is my least favorite thing. All right, here we go. We're gonna do another round of sanding, and once sanded and smooth, that'll be time to fair it. And once we get the fairing dried in, we'll carry it over and dry fit it back onto the boat. Sanding and fairing, sanding and fairing, and then sanding, then a little fairing.